Last week, archaeologists announced they'd found 5 kilometers of hidden roads buried under the jungle around Machu Picchu. Roads no one had ever seen before. That sounds impressive until you understand what was already hiding underneath the city itself. Because what the laser scanners found beneath the walls, not around them, beneath them, is something the official story has never had a clean answer for. And once you see the pattern, you cannot look at this place the same way again. Here's where we start. Not with the famous terraces, not with the photographs you've seen 1,000 times. We start with a wall that shouldn't exist. High in the Andes, more than 7,000 feet above the sea, there's a section of Machu Picchu most tourists walk past without stopping. The guides don't linger there. The postcards don't feature it. But if you press your hand flat against it, you feel something your brain registers before your mouth can find the words for it. The stones don't move. There's no mortar between them, no cement, no glue, no binding material of any kind. And yet the gap between one granite block and the next is so tight that a sheet of paper cannot be slid inside. Not a credit card, not a knife blade, not a human hair, nothing. These aren't small rocks. These are boulders weighing several tons each, some cut with as many as 12 separate angled faces, and they fit against each other with a precision that modern stonemasons, using laser levels and diamond-tipped saws, struggle to copy. They were placed here, we're told, over 500 years ago, by people with no written language, no iron tools, and no surviving record of how they did it. For a long time, the world called this craftsmanship. Remarkable? Yes. Impossible looking? Sure, but craftsmanship. Something skilled human hands could produce, given enough time, enough workers, enough patience. That was the comfortable answer. And then the scanning began. In 2024 and 2025, researchers fed every available laser scan, every high-resolution survey, every precision measurement ever taken at this site into advanced processing systems. Modern multi-return LiDAR systems with higher penetration capability were used at lower altitudes with slower speeds and increased overlap. The goal wasn't to prove a theory, wasn't to confirm what anyone already believed. The goal was simply to look at the raw geometry and report what the data said. No agenda, no career riding on the outcome, just the numbers. What came back split everything at the site into 2 completely separate groups, 2 populations of stone. And the difference between them wasn't subtle. The first group matched exactly what you'd expect from skilled human hands working with stone tools. Variable gaps between blocks, some seams tighter, some looser, surface finishes ranging across a wide spread. The fingerprint of honest, patient mortal labor. Thousands of people grinding stone against stone, testing the fit, lifting, adjusting, lowering, testing again. This is what the textbooks describe. This is what makes intuitive sense. And this population existed all over the site. In the field walls, the terraces, the ordinary structures. Then there was the second group, and this is where the story stops being comfortable. In the second population, the gaps between stones were consistent to within 1/100th of an inch across blocks weighing as much as small automobiles. Seam after seam after seam, the measurements clustered so tightly that the system flagged the distribution as statistically distinct at a confidence level exceeding 94%. An engineer who reviewed that data gave a blunt assessment. Achieving that level of consistency across polygonal blocks of that size, he concluded, would be difficult with modern computer-controlled cutting equipment and effectively impossible with hammerstones and the naked eye. Stop and sit with that for a moment. Not difficult, not challenging, effectively impossible, with the tools the Inca had available. So the question the data laid bare was this: if not with hammerstones and human eyes, then how? The polygonal stones at Machu Picchu, some featuring 12 or more precisely angled sides, interlock with surrounding blocks and complex 3-dimensional puzzles. These irregular shapes appear chaotic, but follow sophisticated geometric principles. Polygonal masonry provides superior earthquake resistance because the irregular shapes create multiple contact points that distribute stress forces across broader areas during seismic events. These complex joints allow controlled movement while maintaining structural integrity. And here's what makes this genuinely strange. Machu Picchu sits on the collision zone of 2 of the planet's major tectonic plates. The mountains it stands on are still rising, still shaking. Ordinary masonry in that setting cracks, shifts, and eventually falls. But the finest walls here do something a modern structural engineer would look at with quiet disbelief. When the earth shakes, the interlocked blocks move. They rise a fraction of an inch and absorb the energy of the tremor and settle back into their exact positions when the ground goes still. The polygonal geometry isn't decoration. It's seismic engineering, a solution to surviving earthquakes at altitude that human builders elsewhere on Earth wouldn't formally develop for another 4 centuries. And here's what makes the survival record even more striking. Major earthquakes in 1650 and 1950 destroyed Spanish colonial buildings in Cusco. The Inca walls survived both. Modern concrete buildings in the same region have cracked and crumbled. These walls with no mortar, no cement, built by a civilization with bronze tools and stone hammers, are still standing without repair. Now, here's where it gets harder to explain away. The researchers who noticed the two populations of stonework weren't the first to observe that the walls at Machu Picchu weren't all the same quality. That had been noted before. What had never been properly weighed was what that difference meant in terms of position. Because when you map the precise stonework against where it physically sits in the structure, a pattern appears that the official account has no clean answer for. The largest megalithic blocks and finest stonework are consistently found in the lower levels of the buildings. As at other sites, certain structures or parts of them appear to predate the Inca. The rougher work, the more ordinary construction, sits on top of and around the finer work below, which means the extraordinary foundations were likely already there, already ancient and weathered, when the people we credit with building the whole site arrived and raised their structures on top of something they had inherited. This is the detail that should have sent off alarm bells decades ago. When you build something, the most important work gets the most attention. Foundations get the rough treatment. The parts people will see get the artistry. That's how human construction has worked for 5,000 years. You can read it at any ancient site on Earth. The parts on display get the care. The hidden parts get whatever is left. At Machu Picchu, the pattern is exactly inverted. The hidden parts are the most precise. The visible parts above them are comparatively rough. The deeper the stone, the tighter the fit. The higher the stone, the more it looks like honest human craftsmanship. And the precision doesn't drift or vary across the hidden levels the way a workforce of tired human hands would cause it to drift. It holds, block after block, as though the human element, the fatigue, the guesswork, the small daily variations of different crews on different days had somehow been removed from the process. Then the researchers did something that changed the shape of the entire question. They asked the system to look down, not at the walls everyone photographs, but below them. LIDAR technology revealed over a dozen previously unknown structures hidden beneath centuries of dense jungle growth, fundamentally changing how archaeologists view this UNESCO World Heritage Site. But even before those external discoveries, the scans of the underground infrastructure at the site itself had already begun returning results nobody expected. Beneath the plazas and terraces, Machu Picchu has a second architecture that almost no visitor ever sees. A hidden foundation of drainage channels, buried retaining structures, and packed layers of crushed stone engineered to shed the mountain's relentless rainfall. It's the reason the site hasn't slid off its ledge into the cloud forest below. Engineers who've studied it estimate that more than half of the total construction effort at Machu Picchu is invisible, underground, doing its work where no eye was meant to admire it. When the laser data from these buried structures was processed, it carried the same statistical signature as the finest walls above. That alone was strange. You don't expect a drainage foundation, something built purely to function, to be constructed to the same uncanny tolerance as a temple meant to impress. But then the system found something the human surveyors had missed entirely, because no human had thought to look for it. The precision in the buried layer wasn't uniform throughout the underground system. In the deepest level, the oldest, the one upon which everything else had been set, the tolerance was tighter still, not by a small margin. The system flagged the deepest stones as belonging to a statistical distribution even more sharply defined than the temple walls above, a confidence level exceeding 97%. And the system noted that this deepest layer didn't appear to arise from the same construction event as the city above it, which means the machine was suggesting in the flat language of statistics that the bottom of Machu Picchu might be older than the top. Let that settle for a moment, because what that means is this. The story we're given is a single story. One people, one century, one burst of extraordinary effort on a high green ridge between two peaks. In that story, the foundation and the temple are the same age, built by the same hands within a few generations of each other. But the data wasn't reading the guidebook. It was reading the stones, and the stones were describing something different. An engineer consulted on the results said something that stuck. In his experience, a construction crew doesn't get more precise as it descends toward the least visible part of a structure. Effort declines with visibility. The parts you can't see get the rough treatment. The parts on display get the artistry. That's human nature, and you can read it at building sites going back thousands of years. But the data found at Machu Picchu inverted that rule completely. The most exacting work was buried at the very bottom, invisible by design, as though it wasn't built to be admired at all. As though it had been built by people who weren't decorating a mountain, they were anchoring something to it. And then the comparison happened. The researchers asked the system to check whether Machu Picchu's deep layer fingerprint was unique to this one site, or whether it appeared somewhere else. They weren't expecting a clear answer. What they got wasn't what anyone planned for. At Sacsayhuaman, the vast zigzag fortress above Cusco, researchers noted polygonal masonry with blocks weighing tens of tons that fit with joints so tight you can't slide a razor blade between them. Earlier cultures, the Kilki, active around 900 to 1200 CE, may have begun construction at some sites, but most archaeologists consider the full picture an open and unsettled question. The data comparison returned matches, weighted, expressed as probabilities, not certainties, but statistically significant, to the foundational stonework at Sacsayhuaman. It returned a correspondence to the polygonal walls at Ollantaytambo, further down the Sacred Valley, where colossal pink granite monoliths stand on a terrace they were somehow transported to across a river and up a mountainside. And then, at a lower confidence but still above the noise threshold, it returned a whisper of the same distribution in megalithic stonework from other ancient sites. The lone mystery on the ridge was no longer alone. The machine was suggesting that the deepest, oldest, most precise stonework at Machu Picchu belonged to a family, that it shared a mathematical fingerprint with the foundations of other impossible walls scattered across the Andes. And a family of stones implies something no standard textbook wants to say out loud: a shared method, a shared standard, a shared knowledge of how to make stone do something later builders, for all their extraordinary skill, could only imitate on the surface. An archaeologist consulted on the network comparison put the discomfort plainly. The conventional model treats each site as the achievement of a specific culture at a specific time, developing its techniques locally. That model, she said, has no room for a shared signature that predates the individual sites. If the fingerprint is real, then it isn't evidence of one brilliant civilization. It's evidence of an inheritance. And an inheritance has to come from something older than the thing that inherited it. Now the researchers went back and did one final thing. They asked the system to sort every measured stone at Machu Picchu, from the deep foundation to the roughest upper wall, purely by tolerance. Ignore where each stone sits, ignore what archaeology says about its age, just rank them from most precise to least. Then they laid that ranking against the physical stratigraphy, against depth, against which stones sit beneath which. The two lists lined up. The deeper the stone, the tighter the tolerance. The higher the stone, the looser. Precision didn't increase as the city rose. It decayed, layer by layer, upward through time. The work got rougher. The joints got a little more forgiving. The mathematics got a little less exact, as though each generation of builders was working from a memory of something they no longer fully possessed, copying a standard they could see in what was already there, but could no longer entirely reproduce themselves. The Inca who raised the visible city, who were extraordinary engineers, genuinely remarkable stonemasons, were not at the peak of this knowledge. They were at the bottom of its long, slow forgetting. This is the reversal that changes everything. We're taught to think of ancient skill as a rising line, cruder at the beginning, refined over centuries, culminating in the masterworks we visit today. The data was describing the opposite, a line that fell. The oldest hands were the most exact. The later hands were reaching upward toward a precision they had already lost and could no longer regenerate. And that is not how learning works. That is how forgetting works. Some of the rougher upper sections of stonework at certain Andean sites are actually modern reconstruction, retaining walls added to prevent erosion after sites became tourist destinations. Early 1900s photographs show no such walls, confirming they postdate the Inca era. But even setting the reconstruction aside, even looking only at the authenticated original stone, the pattern holds. The deeper you go, the better the work. The higher you go, the more it looks like skilled but human craftsmanship doing its best to imitate something it inherited from below. An engineer who reviewed the tolerance ranking gave an assessment he clearly didn't enjoy giving. In every craft he'd ever studied, mastery accumulates. A technique invented is a technique improved. You don't see a discipline get worse at its own foundational skill while continuing to practice it in the same location with the same stone for generations. When you see decline like that, it usually means one thing. The people still performing the act no longer understand the principle behind it. They're following instructions they can't regenerate. And instructions you can't regenerate are instructions you didn't invent. You received the